Hello, everyone. Well, I hope that when you leave tonight, you will forgive me if I did not meet your expectations. Because coming here in this hot evening and wanting to together to look at the concept of forgiveness, it, re- it requires asking your forgiveness. I've been thinking about this topic for many years. However, in recent weeks and months, this issue has become the subject of discussion in Canada, in the United States, in many parts of the world. For example, in Canada, we have been talking about what has happened to the First Nations, to the Aboriginal peoples of this land. And the issue of forgiveness has been mentioned on different occasions, different ways. In the United States, only 2 days ago, or yesterday was it, the President of the United States, Mr. Obama, was talking about the remarkable forgiveness that was expressed on the part of nine families of the nine people who were killed in a church and in Charleston, and how great was the impact of forgiveness in the psyche of the society in the United States. But the issue of forgiveness goes much deeper than that, because we human beings have a natural tendency, natural meaning what is based on our physical, biological nature, okay? We have a natural tendency that when somebody does something wrong to us, we want to retaliate. We want to take revenge. This is a natural reaction. Natural, again, meaning it is the expression of the biological dimension of human nature. As you know, we human beings are in the crossroad of creation. On the one hand, we have our one foot in the animal world. On the other hand, we can put our other foot or both feet in the spiritual world. And we have this phenomena of will, of decision making, that can take us this way or that way. And that is why the expression of human nature is always in this seeming duality. On the one hand, we may be animal-like, naturally responding to this, or we may respond the other way. Now, throughout history, humanity has had two sources of guidance. One has been religion, and the other has been science. They have guided us how to live. And always, religion has been ahead of science. Not the other way around. People think science is ahead of religion, and religion is backward. But in reality, when we reflect and think and observe what has happened in human history, we see that religion has been always ahead of science in prescribing how we should live our lives. Now, forgiveness is an example of that. So what I'm going to do to share with you very briefly vignettes of what different religions throughout history have given teachings about forgiveness. Then I'm going to share with you new scientific studies that are being done about forgiveness. And then we reach a little bit of a conclusion together at the end. So that's the whole idea. Now, religions, I'm just going to go one by one and just give you an example. In Judaism, for example, if a person causes harm but then sincerely and honestly apologizes to the wronged individual and tries to rectify the wronged individual is religiously required to grant forgiveness. Now that's interesting. Here in Judaism, if somebody does wrong to you, you should go and ask for forgiveness. And if you go and ask for forgiveness, you should forgive them. So that's in Christianity. The Peter came to him, Jesus, and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? That's what Peter asked. And Jesus answered, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. That's 490 times. Okay? Up to 70 times 7. Jesus repeatedly spoke about forgiveness. In Islam teaches that Allah is Al-Ghafur, the one that forgives, and is the original source of all forgiveness. God is the original source of all forgiveness. And seeking forgiveness from Allah is a virtue. We always have to ask forgiveness. There is much more in Islam, but it's sufficient for our purposes here. In Buddhism, he abused me, he struck me, he overcame me, he robbed me. In those who harbor such thoughts, hatred will never cease. If you think he abused me, he struck me, and so forth, if you don't forget that, if you don't forgive that, then hatred will never leave you. It will be always with you. And then Buddha says, in Buddhism, it says, he abused me, he struck me, he overcame me, he robbed me. In those who do not harbor such thoughts, hatred will cease. If you don't have these thoughts, you will not be hateful. In Zoroastrianism, the teachings of forgiveness, mercy, and tolerance are essential aspects of religion of Zoroastrianism. So the question comes, how come all these religions about talking about forgiveness? But when we read the writings of the Baha'i faith, we come into a much more profound elaboration of the concept of forgiveness. There are at least three areas when we read the writings of the Baha'i faith that come to attention, or at least came to my attention about forgiveness. First, we have to ask for forgiveness. We always have to ask forgiveness. We have to ask forgiveness from God because we are not perfect. We have to ask forgiveness from other people because nobody is perfect. Okay. I'm sorry to mention, I apologize. Okay. But nobody is perfect. So we have to ask for forgiveness. The second is that we have to consciously forgive. We have to develop the capacity to forgive. And that's a very difficult thing to do. Because as I said, natural tendency of people is that say, I have been wronged, I cannot forget this, I never would forget them or that person. Okay? And the third thing that we read in the writings of the Baha'i faith we come across is that we have to ask to be forgiven. We have to actually have the courage to go to somebody and say, please forgive me. Okay? We have to forgive, we have to be asked forgiveness, and of course, we have to turn to God and ask for forgiveness. Listen to this statement of Abdul Baha. Abdul Baha says, love the creatures for the sake of God and not for themselves. You will never become angry or impatient if you love them for the sake of God. Why? Abdul Baha said, humanity is not perfect. There are imperfections in every human being. And you will always become unhappy if you look toward the people themselves. But if you look toward God, you will love them and be kind to them, for the word of God is the word of perfection and complete mercy. Therefore, do not look at the shortcomings of anybody. See with the sight of forgiveness. So, one of the tendencies of us human beings is that when something is contrary to our desires and our inclinations, we try to either ignore it or argue about it and say, no, that's not correct. And usually we put it aside. And history of religion has been the history of not accepting the guidance of God about forgiveness. Religions have evolved to be the most unforgiving populations in human history. Look what they are doing. Look what religions have done throughout history of humanity. Look what we are doing right now. When I started working after the war, a 5 year civil war in Bosnia-Herzegovina, former Yugoslavia. I was working almost exclusively with people who either have been aggressors in the war or victims in the war or both. Okay, everybody was in that, one of those categories. And I remember I was teaching, training all about several hundred teachers in one of the cities about how to become a peacemaker and how to move from being angry to someone who is loving and kind. And among the people that was in my audience, one of them was a very high-ranking military person who had killed, who has been the cause of killing of many. And he started arguing with me and discussing that it's impossible, it's a part of human nature, and so forth. And I asked him, why did you do these things? Why you and your friends and your soldiers and your army colleagues did these kind of things? And he said, we did it for love of our people. And because we love our people. And I said, what makes you to think that these people that you were killing are going to interfere for your love for your people? And he said, because of what happened 700 years ago. 700 years ago, there was a war between the Muslim and the Orthodox Christians of that population in that era. And according to him and according to history, Muslims were victorious and were really unkind, put it nicely. And they hadn't forgiven and they haven't forgotten. So 700 years later, they are still at it. And when I was talking, it was very interesting. In Bosnia, when you talk with people, they said we have a 50-year curse. What is the 50-year curse? They have a war every 50 years for 700 years. This is an example of what happens when you don't forgive. When you don't forgive, not only you become ill and become psychologically afflicted and burdened with hatred. Not only that, is that it would be impossible for you to get out of it. It's just simply you cannot get out of it. Doesn't matter what the other person does. The relationship of you with the other person would not be normal again unless you actively forgive, and hopefully the other side actively ask for forgiveness. One of the interesting developments of our time with respect to issue of forgiveness was what happened in South Africa after the apartheid. The apartheid was the most devastating abuse of one group against another group. And traditionally, the history has been that they would not forgive each other and they would retaliate and take revenge. And the remarkable thing that happened is that when, what was his name? Mandela came to power, Mandela and Bishop Tutu together decided to have a different approach. And the different approach was truth and reconciliation experiment. And truth and reconciliation experiment was that let people come who have been aggressors and tell their stories. Listen to the stories of the people who have been their victims. Let people tell the stories of what happened to them. This is what happened in Aboriginal people also here in Canada. Let them do that. And let those people listen and then get up and verbalize what they have done and the mistakes that they have done and the sorrow that they have and the apology that they should make in order for them to forgive each other. That had a profound impact because the transition from the oppression to a more peaceful community in South Africa took place as a result of this bringing together of the people in the context of forgiveness. Help them to forgive each other. Now, that was a very interesting experiment. There are many problems with it. And it's not applicable everywhere, and there are a number of issues that are neglected and so forth, but that's not the point. The point is that to the extent that that was a positive experiment of looking at the truth and asking for forgiveness and being willing to forgive, it helped people. To that extent that they did it, it was helpful and prevented from society to go into pieces. Now, let's also now to see what is happening with the concept of forgiveness in the scientific world. In the scientific world, the whole issue of forgiveness first began to really appear in medicine and in both biological medicine, also psychological medicine. People began to notice certain attributes of people who forgive and people who do not forgive. There's quite a bit of research has been done on it. The one area that they have researched is about personality of people who forgive. The relationship between forgiveness and personality. And they have found that people who forgive are usually more agreeable personalities.
Agreeable to what?
Agreeable, the kind people. They agree, you're not fighting and aggressive and assertive. You're agreeable people. They found that the less negative feelings and affects people who have less negative feelings. By negative feelings, they mean anxiety, depression, and hostility and anger. The less people have that, the more forgiving they are. Okay, the more forgiving. These are obvious. But we human beings have to have, especially in modern era, scientific proof in order to accept it. We wouldn't accept the word of God. But the word of a psychologist that we don't know, we accept. Okay? This is that's the way we are, okay? God, forget it. But a psychologist that you don't know, yes, of course. All right, okay. So they did it. Also, they found that the less ruminative a person has, because many people ruminate, and when something wrong has happened to them, they ruminate about it, think about it, think about it, think about it. The less you are that way, the more forgiving you are. And also, the less narcissistic you are, which none of you are. But if you were narcissistic, selfish, then you would have difficulty to forgive. Narcissists don't forgive. So, these are some of the characteristics of relationship between personality and forgiveness. Another area that they have done research is about the social factors and forgiveness. In other words, what impact has society on people's attitude towards forgiveness? And we have found that the society has enormous impact on behavior of people. The kind of community that you are a part, the kind of society that you live, the kind of nation that you live in, the kind of religious group that you have, determines to a large degree also whether you are forgiving or not. And one of the main reasons for that is that people in groups behave differently than in isolation. You see, when people are in groups, if they have their foot in the lower part of their nature, they do much worse things than they otherwise would do. That's the phenomenon we see in the gangs. In the gangs, we see that a number of good kids come together and they encourage each other to do the wrong thing. And they do the wrong thing that they never would do alone. Because in the context of group, people have a tendency to abandon some of their self-control and give it to the group. You see, and that's the reason that in soldiers, for example, in war, they encourage each other to do such awful things, or members of gangs, or different, even ordinary kids going around, or adults going around doing kind of things that they do in the group. Now, the group also has the opposite impact, that if the group has high standards, if it has high values, if it's not relativistic, is not going to change its ideas constantly, and not to have really clear standards of behavior. If the group has those standards, then people who are members of that group behave positively. And if you are a member of a community that encourages forgiveness and establishes the ultimate goal of your existence as a person to be a unifier, then that community would have positive impact on the behavior of its members and would help its members. Okay. Now, another thing that they have looked into it is about the relationships. It has been found that people who have good relationships in general, they find it much easier to forgive somebody who is not related to them and does something to them and so forth. But also, if they have good relationships, they forgive each other much easier. Good families, how many times you have said to your husband or wife or parents, forgive me, I'm sorry. How many times we do it? We do it many, many times because there is a higher level of uh, value is in the relationship than just the little discomfort that we have had about the wrongdoing of the other person. So these are some of the findings that they have found. But they have also found in medicine that people who are forgiving, they are much more healthy. Physically, they are much more healthy. They have found not only emotionally healthier, physically, they are much more healthy. So what you're trying to do, they're trying to say, people, you should learn to forgive. Something that religions have been telling humanity from the beginning of time, that we have to be forgiving. Now, why is that? Why forgiveness helps people to feel emotionally better, physically healthier, and developing better relationship? Why is that? And the reason is related to the dynamics of healing. You see, we in life are constantly faced with challenges and difficulties that come our way through the lack of care of other people. Many of us encounter anger. Many of us experience conflict. Good number of us experience violence. A good number of us are subject to backbiting, of people talking behind our backs, people making fun of us, people rejecting us, people, all kinds of things that people do to each other that injure our soul. Our souls become injured, become burdened. And when the soul becomes burdened, it expresses its burden through both emotional and physical disorders. Emotionally, the burdened soul emotionally is more depressed, more angry, more anxious, more resentful. And these emotions then decrease the capacity of the organism to defend itself against physical diseases. And it becomes a vicious cycle. Now, if we learn the process of forgiveness, of forgiving and asking for forgiveness, if we do that, then we gradually heal our burdened soul. Because healing only takes place when the entity that you're trying to heal becomes whole again, becomes unified, becomes integrated. Disunity is disease. Unity is health. So that phenomena of healing is, whether it is a personal healing or a community healing or a global healing, that phenomenon is closely related to our ability to overlook each other's shortcomings and to see each other's positive qualities and coming together. Because when we come together, we experience the healing qualities of love. That's what happens. Because, as you know, unity is the fundamental teachings of the Baha'i faith. But what is the force of unity? The force of unity is love. It is love that allows us to create unity. So we have to learn the way of loving. But we cannot be a loving person if we are not forgiving. If we don't forgive, we cannot be loving. Now, who should we forgive? Who should we forgive? Who should we? First, ourselves. First, we have to forgive ourselves because we make many mistakes. That's why every day in our prayers, we turn to Baha'u'llah and we say, forgive me. Okay? We ask for forgiveness. And when are we forgiven? I remember many, many years ago, and I mean many, many years ago, in 1957. You see, it's a long time ago, or even before that. I asked my Baha'i teacher, Mr. Ashraf Khavari, I asked him, how do we know we are forgiven? And he said, you are forgiven when you don't repeat the act that you are asking to be forgiven about. Okay? That's when you are forgiven. In other words, if I am an alcoholic and drink, and I turn to God every day and say, God, forgive me, or go, if I'm Catholic, go to the priest and say, oh, Father, forgive me. Okay? I have sinned. It doesn't matter whether it's drinking or whether stealing something or doing anything that is wrong. And then I ask for forgiveness, and then I repeat that act, then I'm not forgiven. I will be forgiven when I stop repeating the act for which I'm asking forgiveness. Now, that's a very nice standard. You immediately know whether you're on the right path or not. Okay? But of course, that's very difficult because we repeat our mistakes. Because many of our behavior is automatic. They have become habits. We habitually respond negatively to people. We habitually, automatically respond, wanting to take revenge or wanting to avoid the person. I don't want to be with that person again. Avoiding the person is not forgiving. You see, many people say, okay, I don't want to be with that person again. But doesn't solve the problem. The avoiding or taking revenge, both of them have negative consequences only the positive act of us forgiving and asking for forgiveness that would change the phenomenon, would bring about greater degree of closeness, allow us to express love. In other words, forgiving is an act of love. And asking to be forgiven is also an act of love, because you make it easy for that person not to be angry and upset and so forth. So you're giving that person a gift. But that is a very difficult thing to do, because we have to fight our ego. You see, it is very difficult to say to somebody, I have made a mistake, please forgive me. Okay, it's a very difficult thing to do. So, because it is so difficult, within ourselves, we should forgive ourselves every day. And every day we should turn to God and ask for forgiveness. And we should then make it a habit with our friends, with our family members, whoever we come close to, ask for forgiveness, because with them we are closer, until it gradually becomes a second habit for us, until we gradually become automatically a person who forgives, who asks for forgiveness, and who is not embarrassed to get involved in that process. Now, that's at an individual level. Then at the social level comes to the whole issue of the Baha'i community. In the Baha'i community hasn't yet gelled together. We are not yet really totally connected. We are a bunch of very nice individuals, but we are disconnected. We are not connected with each other. We haven't yet created communities that we would see each other regularly and love each other, and when we get sick, everybody goes to the hospital, and when we have good things happening, everybody comes and everybody knows. We are not in that situation yet, okay? We are not in that situation because of many reasons. We are very small and we are scattered among large numbers of people. That's one of the reasons. We are not oppressed like we were in Iran. In Iran, we were a community. We were, because people were hitting us and were against us and making life difficult for us, and still we are doing it. So you then become connected with each other. But that is not an ideal condition of community. You don't want to have a community to be always oppressed. Okay? What you like to do is to create a community that is so close to each other, so loving toward each other, so forgiving of each other, so accepting of each other, that everybody wants to be a part of it. And that is the challenge that we have. And I think to a very large degree, we have not got involved and engaged in thinking about and talking about how we can forgive the little things that happen between us that make us estranged from each other. You know, little things happens here and there and there, and we just avoid each other. And we just become aloof. And then we go through rituals of coming together once in a while and dispersing again and having our private lives, and that's it. So the challenge in a community is that we together consciously, deliberately, and so forth, try to create a loving, united, forgiving community. Okay? And encouraging. because one of the essential elements of love is encouragement. What is encouragement? Encouragement is the process of giving somebody courage, right? That's encouragement. How do you give somebody courage? You give somebody courage by looking at their and identifying their positive qualities and celebrate their positive qualities. When you do that, then you are encouraging the other person. Okay? There is no such a thing as a constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is destructive. Okay? What is essential is encouragement. Because it is through the encouragement that you identify the positive qualities of the other person. And the more you focus on the positive, the less become the negative. The more you focus on the negative, the more disappears the positive. It's the dynamics of encouragement. So here we see a number of things are connected together. Encouragement, forgiving, love, unity. These are all connected to each other at the individual level, at the community level, global level. These are all connected to each other. So by doing this, we are focusing on these issues in the Baha'i community, we create a healing community. Humanity is suffering, humanity is ill, is burdened with many, many disorders. And Baha'u'llah, the divine physician, has come to help us to heal the wounds of the soul of humanity. And in order to do that, we have to create a community that is forgiving, loving, encouraging, unified, united. And when we do that, something else happens. So these are just some reflections on the issue of forgiveness that I thought may be of help as we continue our activities to be of service to ourselves and to each other and to our communities and to the world. Okay, dear friends, you have been very forgiving. Thank you very much. Thank you.